Welcome to Fridaze. Unfortunately, this week, my partner in crime, JJ Vance, not JD Vance, to be confused with him, neither one of them will be joining us tonight. But fortunately, lucky me, I was able to grab some people to come on with me and try to make this a worthy episode without JJ here. So I got the mad scientist herself, Lisa from the Occult Rejects. Thank you very much, Lisa. It's good to have you here. And I got my boy Catalyst Jones, kind of like co-hosting with us tonight from White Rabbit Podcast. Real quick, Catalyst, you want to let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find you?
Yeah, man, I'm just your average guy that had questions and started digging into things and wanted to speak out about it. So you can find me on all of your usual suspects.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And for tonight, the guest of honor, backed by popular demand, we got Julia, Cosmic Peach Podcast. Please, Julia, introduce yourself for the people who may not know who you are and let everybody know where they can find your amazing work.
Thank you. And I'm excited to be back. I love coming on your show. I'm Julia. I host Cosmic Peach Podcast. It's wherever you listen to podcasts, not YouTube. And yeah, I think, I started actually podcasting because I read a lot of books and wanted to talk to people about them because people don't like to read books anymore. And that's the first thing that we covered was Program to Kill. And then I read a book about Marilyn, and we've covered that already. And actually, what we're going to talk about today, you can find in Program to Kill. And also, I just did a bunch of research on the side after I read about this guy, and I think Lisa has actually it was in the news or something like that, and you were familiar with it too. So I'm actually really excited to get into it today.
Oh yeah, no, yes, I was very excited, and I know Lisa really wanted you to come on for this topic as well. And again, just to make it clear, you did say you got this from the Program to Kill book, correct? You said
yeah. And what I love the most about that book is because he puts all of his references in the back of the book, and there's pages and pages of references. And when I do a podcast, I like to try to give people some type of place where they can go and fact check me if they want to. And so if you want more information about what we're talking about tonight, it's actually chapter 9 of Program to Kill. It's called Rancho Diablo. So fucking fact check me, assholes.
Hashtag look it up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which is also why when we did the Maryland episode, I mentioned at the end of the episode, this is the book. Go read it for yourself. I'm not making any of this stuff up. It's very easy to find. And so,
oh no, I didn't think that was the case. I just wanted to just reiterate.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, but I do feel like sometimes, you listen to a podcast and in the back of your mind, you're like, is that even real? Does she even know what she's talking about? I've never heard that before. And I like to list my sites, in case somebody wants to go back and fact check me or whatever. But we're actually going to be
That's what I love about your
uh,
show, Julia. I love about your show is you always bring your receipts, right? So you say how you came to your conclusion, but yet you also come to conclusions that normally people would overlook or not come to because you're one of those people that connects dots that get overlooked on the norm. And I would like to congratulate you for that.
Thank you. And I'm glad you noticed that. And actually, Lisa was the one who asked, I think, if I could cover this today, because I mentioned names and I mentioned like little fragments of stuff. And I feel like sometimes, you hear it and it's like in one ear and out the other. But she picked up on this guy. And it's like I said before, he's his own episode. He might actually be 2 episodes worth of crazy. And his name is Adolfo Constanzo. I don't know, Catalyst, if you had ever heard of this guy, but he is a whole fucking, I mean, I like to call him Adolfo Cunt Stanzo, but he is just the weirdest guy ever. He's a cult leader, and he was a Mexican drug lord that was believed to have supernatural powers, actually. And so, Lisa, before I get on my soapbox, I actually wanted to ask you what your background is on Adolfo.
So I was listening to your PTK series, and you had briefly mentioned his name on, I think, the first episode that you covered PTK, and just in passing. And when you said his name, I remember I was standing in the bathroom doing my makeup, and I was like, I like stared at the phone. I was like, don't tell me that guy's in that book. Because so growing up, I grew up in Texas, South Texas to be exact. And one of the popular things here to do in spring break is to go to the island, Padre Island, right? And it gets so packed with so many people, everybody from like New York, Pennsylvania, California, everybody comes down here to come to the island during spring break. It's a big deal, specifically South Padre. And so South Padre is literally right at the cusp of the Mexican border. And one of the famous things to do, or one of the most fun things to do, was to cross into Reynosa or Progreso or Matamoros, depending where you're at, right? Matamoros is going to be the area that's the closest to South Padre Island. And so what people would do is that they would go party all day at the island, and then in the evenings they just basically walk over into Matamoros and get drunk and do all what kinds of whatever. And I think in Mexico at the time, and I think it's still the way, there was the legal age was 18, but I don't think they really checked or whatever. And you could keep drinking all day and all night and whatever. And it was a fun thing for people to do. And then you started to hear on the news that people were going missing, and then that there was a search. And then they would announce, do not go into Mexico. If you're going to go to the island, stay on the US side, do not go into Mexico. And then it came about that there was, I think, a UT student, which University of Texas, went missing. And then I believe there was a huge investigation down into Matamoros, and that they had uncovered several bodies. And that from what I had heard, and of course the news didn't cover this, was that they were bodies that were mutilated. They were all kinds of like remnants of ritual sacrifice of some sort, a death cult, Satan cult, whatever. And it was really, really bad. And that it wasn't just one person that they found, but they, at the time they had said it was 5, but there was many others that they had found in other, I guess, sites or burial sites, and that there was a house, and that there was body parts and in a cauldron and stuff like that. And so you started to hear all these things. You don't know what's true, right? Because it's on the other side, and this is what's being told, and the news really isn't covering, but they're telling you not to go down there. But then whenever it kind of blew up, this name starts coming out, and you start to hear it all over the place. You're like, oh my God, that was the guy that was back then when they were telling us not to go into Mexico. So that was my background with that. So when you said the name, I was like, no.
Dude, and it's crazy because he's mentioned in Program to Kill, but he also got his own episode on Ancient Aliens. Like, there's so many ways that you can cover this guy. Like, it's just bizarre. It's otherworldly what was going on there. And I think that actually the way that they portrayed it in the news was like a lot of the serial killers and stuff, how they it was 1989, by the way, in Mexico. They started searching for a missing college student, and then they found this ranch. It was called Santa Elena Ranch.
Yes, Santa Elena.
And so the missing college student that they were looking for, his name was Mark Kilroy. It was a dude. He was 21 years old, partying, like Lisa mentioned. It was like a party spot. And then they go looking for him, and they come across this ranch, and they find 12 bodies at first. And some of them have been shot. Some of them have been hacked up with a machete. One of the graves did have Mark Kilroy's body in it, so he was abducted. They did murder him. A lot of them had like their spines ripped out and made into necklaces and other ceremonial type of jewelry. Some of them had been skinned alive. Some of them had been buried alive. But the weird thing about him is that Adolfo's followers wholeheartedly believed that he had supernatural powers. And so this is what gets him on Ancient Aliens, because a lot of the stuff that he was doing and saying, and a lot of the stuff that people saw him doing, was actually what they considered to be supernatural in nature. And they don't talk about this aspect in Program to Kill. He more talks about like the political side of things, because they made it appear in the news that this was random acts of violence, that this guy was just a crazy Satanist guy, and he was just abducting random people and just fucking them up and burying them all over his property. But it actually turns out that a lot of the people that they found, it wasn't random at all. And I'm actually going to kind of get into that too. But it said in total, they found 40 plus bodies on the property. So the news didn't even really want to report that at first. It was like, oh, they found a couple bodies. And then it was like, okay, we found 12 graves. And then by the end of it, they were like, okay, there's probably 40 plus victims that have been buried at this ranch. And he was practicing something called Palo sorcery. I don't know if you guys are
Palo
familiar with
Mayombe.
that at all.
Mhm.
Palo Mayombe is it's also referred to. And so it incorporates traditions and gods from West African religions, actually. And Adolfo claimed that he was in communication with a god named Kadium Pimbe, I think is how you pronounce it. And this god is also known as Eshu, Eshu. And this is something that I had never heard before. And it was mentioned actually in the Ancient Alien. And it was funny because sometimes I'll just watch Ancient Aliens to like go to sleep, because it first of all, it's a lot of propaganda stuff.
Well,
And
it's
I'm like,
nothing too
okay,
deep,
let's
either. Like easy stuff to listen to.
right. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm gonna
Yes.
clean the house and like fucking wash dishes and shit. I'll put on a Ancient Aliens in the background or whatever. And so
I was
this
surprised
thing,
at how much truth they sprinkle in there, though. Like if you take
yeah,
out
right,
That is
right.
true. That
if
is
you
true.
take out aliens, if you take out aliens and outer space and replace it with Nephilim and outer space, it all makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. Like if you just swap out the ETs for like ancient gods and like black magic sorcery shit, it makes a ton of sense. But so it was like, I don't know, a couple months ago, I had turned on Ancient Aliens and they were like, Adolfo Constanzo. And I was like, this is the motherfucker in Program to Kill. I was like, how the fuck is he in an Ancient Aliens episode? But so it's because his followers, and he said that he was in direct communication with this Kadium Pimbe, and that he was practicing Palo sorcery. And when you look at this god, he has like the big elongated eyes and the big skull and shit. And they say that he was worshiping some type of god that would have been like Akhenaten in ancient Egypt with the big elongated skull and shit. And some say that he was into like this fallen angel type of god king worship. And so he gets his own episode on Ancient Aliens, and I look into this shit because I'm interested. And it's actually a shapeshifter god. And you know how they love to talk about shapeshifters and all this stuff, and they all actually sensationalize this stuff. Because if they can get you to look at just the black magic aspect of these murders, then they don't have to explain any of the inconsistencies with like who they were murdering and like who was running the cult and some shit like that. And I actually, just for those of you who are familiar, have you guys watched American Horror Story season Coven? No.
Which one was
It's
that
it's
about?
That season, not that season.
It's my favorite season. It's the one about the witches in New Orleans. And
That was one of the seasons I didn't see actually.
really, Nick, it's the best season in my opinion for some of the more conspiracy type stuff. But they have like a god in that season that the witches kind of work with, and his name is Papa Legba. But he's based off this god that Adolfo Constanzo actually worshiping. So it to me, it just seemed a
Oh,
little
that's like a real
interesting.
deity too. That is a real deity.
Papa Legba.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say like this god, this Kadium Pimbe, Eshu, Papa Legba, they all represent like the same archetype, if you will. And they say that actually this one deity that Adolfo was worshiping, like, to speak to people through dogs, and they actually connected that with David Berkowitz because they said he would get his messages through dogs and stuff like that. And David Berkowitz comes up a lot in Program to Kill. So I think that there is a duality to everything. I think that there is a spiritual duality and also like a governmental kind of. I don't think that those two things have to be separate. I think that they're very much enmeshed with each other. So yeah, I do. When I look at this case, I do see a lot of like how Ancient Aliens was trying to depict it in being like a spiritual thing with black magic. But I also look at it from the perspective that David McGowan was writing about in Program to Kill, where it's like, yeah, it's spiritual, but also like, look at the type of people that they were abducting. They're all like ex-police officers and like DEA agents and FBI agents. Like, this isn't random. They're choosing their victims very specifically. And kind of like what we were talking about in our Maryland episode, Adolfo was arrested in August, and there is a lot of eights that are around Adolfo. They say that he had only killed 8 victims. It turned out to be a lot more, but that's the first number they came out with. And then he was arrested in August, so there was like a double 8 there.
I gotta
But
love that.
here's, huh?
I love those 8s.
Dude, I think that the 8 is super significant when you see it popping up, like
Oh,
in specifically with stuff like this too. It's just weird, but
Well, in occultism, it is in reference to the infinity, right?
yeah, the magician too. Yeah, for sure. Or even
and
like
he is a magician of sorts, right?
uh,
So
well, 88. Even that you get like HH.
Yeah, and we can talk about this later, but he is looking at some of the stuff. I believe one of the claims was that the padrino that he studied under, Adolfo did as a kid, that he locked him in with that deity, the one that you just mentioned, that he performed all these rituals in order to bind him to that deity. And he was the one that, like, I think when he was, and even the way he was born too, and you covered this so well, the way he was born is just very questionable. But that priest basically said, this child is chosen, he's the one, he's going to be powerful. Like, it's just all this, like, I don't know,
well,
force.
it reminds me because a lot of these Satanists are generational, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so I talked about it with Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole in the Program to Kill episode, where they said that their parents, their mothers, dressed them as girls and they were kind of like involved in generational Satanism. And
mhm,
Adolfo was born into generational Satanism. His mother was something of a high priestess, and he worked with this other guy, I think it was in Puerto Rico,
mhm.
who, like you said, kind of blessed him, and he was under this guy's like tutelage or whatever, trying to become a master fucking Satanist. And oh, look at this, 88 piano keys, look at all of that shit. The DeLorean, oh yeah, gun it to 88. Fucking, I love Back to the Future. I think it's actually got a lot of conspiracy stuff in it. But anyways, here's the kicker, because you can't separate the Satanism from the governmental stuff, because he served in the United States Army in the 60s, just like a lot of our serial killers. And he claims that while he was in the Army, he had been initiated into a violent satanic cult that orchestrated these incidents as part of a ritual murder, just like Henry Lee Lucas said and Otis Toole. But on top of that, like BTK, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and Adolfo Constanzo, they all end up writing letters to the police. And it's almost like there's this interesting connection between programmed serial killers, I'm including Adolfo in that, and the police and or military style shit. And it's just interesting to me that there's this aspect of him writing letters to the police. They could have known about this guy and stopped him a long time ago, but they didn't. Just like the Zodiac, just like BTK, just like Jack the Ripper. It takes them forever, if they even find out, who these people are. They never fucking found out who Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac was, but here's all these letters, right, written to the police. And so I do think that he's saying that he's basically like a government employee. He was in the military. He does have this background of being a Satanist. He was born into generational Satanism because his mother was fucking batshit crazy. But I think it's safe to say, like, he's a lot like the other cast of characters with the ritualism and the governmental stuff and being protected from on high. Because one of the more compelling aspects of Henry Lee Lucas's story was his contention that he had ties to cult-run ranches that were just south of the US border. Okay. And then boom, out of nowhere in 1989, this ranch, Adolfo's Ranch, was discovered just south of Brownsville, Texas. Okay. And Adolfo is saying he was inducted into a military satanic cult just like Henry Lee Lucas said he was. And I don't think that that is a coincidence. Henry Lee Lucas is saying there are cult-run ranches that are inducting people to become almost like cult leaders, and they're murdering a bunch of people. And then all of a sudden we find Adolfo's Ranch, and it matches the exact description that Henry Lee Lucas took a map and he said, he marked an X and he said, there's a ranch right here. There's a ranch right here. You'll find dead bodies all over the place. And they were like, okay, Henry. Fucking made a Netflix documentary saying, oh, Henry, the confession killer, he couldn't possibly have known all this stuff, but yet somehow he was able to lead them right to these fucking ranches where all these dead people were. And more than half of Adolfo's cult members and priestesses were from Brownsville, Texas. They weren't Mexican. You know, a lot of people say that, oh, well, they were just crazy Mexican people and they were all they were from Brownsville, Texas, and most of them went to Southmost Texas College and were majoring in law enforcement. So they were Americans. They were educated. I don't know how the fuck they got involved in that, but here they show up at Adolfo's fucking compound in the middle of fucking Mexico, murdering people and burying them alive and shit. I mean, it's just,
Do you think that they were possibly Clockwork Ultra'd?
I do. I think that they were, because here's the thing, right?
But specifically sent out there though to be underneath him.
Yeah, I think a lot like Charles Manson, that these family members weren't chosen at random. And I actually have a quote right here in my notes that I'm going to read you guys, because Adolfo was described as, quote, a thoroughly ruthless and malevolent genius with a messianic ability to command the loyalty and blind obedience of his followers who joined him. The followers were in a zombie-like state with a loathsome blood feast of dope-dealing, torture, terror, and human sacrifice, quote unquote. Which is exactly how they described Manson and his family members, as being in a zombie-like, and what is it? The dope dealing, terror, torture, and human sacrifice. It literally sounds like he's like Manson 2.0, and he's got these people out there doing God knows what. They probably fucked with their minds enough to send them over to him, and he just kind of like ran some kind of program.
That's what I was thinking. It was definitely curated for them to be there.
And it's like his mom somehow was also involved in this too, because she was arrested like 30 something times and the charges never seemed to stick with her. Like, she literally could do all kinds of weird stuff, and she always like got some kind of a short probation or something. Like, she was arrested over 30 times and the most she ever got was like a short probation.
Isn't that weird, how we always hear that? It's just strange,
It's
right?
like, It's like Ted
Catch and
Bundy
release.
escaping from prison twice. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. And they found Adolfo's mom living in a vacant, dilapidated apartment building that was smeared with human shit and human blood and urine. And she was charged with trespassing and child neglect. And that didn't even stick to her. Like, tell me how they find you in an abandoned apartment building covered with human shit and piss and blood with children, and you don't serve any jail time whatsoever. I mean, 30 times this woman is arrested. She gets off the hook scot-free, right? And in my opinion, it just shows that this is part of like a generational programming. It's like Lisa said, from the second this guy is born, they're doing rituals on him and shit. He's the chosen one. They've got him training under some kind of a priest guy. And, his mom never goes to jail. She pretty much can do whatever she wants and get away with it. And apparently Adolfo too. I mean, he's got 40 plus bodies buried all over his compound doing rituals and shit. And it took years for them to find this guy, even with Henry Lee Lucas pointing his compound out on a map and going, look, here, go check this place. It's a fucking satanic cult and they're murdering people. Okay, Henry.
It's because they're governmental science experiments and they want to see what is going to happen. So they allow this to happen and they keep it perpetuating.
Right. And so in this part is crazy to me because it's not like after they bust these guys, like it all just goes away and we don't see more of it, because I feel like it's an archetype and that they just use different people in these roles throughout time. And Adolfo was something of a Marina Abramovich for the 80s. And he actually moved to Mexico City in 1984 and he became a psychic to the stars. Yep. And all of his friends were super famous celebrities, politicians. He lived an extremely extravagant lifestyle. And he did all this spirit cooking and shit with them. And he was the psychic to the stars, like Marina.
And he also, I believe, was like also recruited by like the equivalent of our FBI director down in Mexico. Like he was asking him and paying him off either to find stuff or to prevent people from getting caught, but it was always some sort of manipulation whatsoever. Then you also had him very associated with a lot of the cartels, heads, like the actual main people in charge, and like asking for, hey, can you do me a solid,
Well, and see, that's the part that gets me is they don't never mention that in the Ancient Aliens episode, right? It's all about the sorcery aspect of it. And he's communicating with extra, suck my dick. Like there's so much more going on. And they try to turn it all into like, it's gotta be aliens. Tell me where the aliens fits into, like, it doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit, but I do know that I think with his mom, and then the priest that I think did his indoctrination, which I think is totally suspect, because so he's a priest that says he's the chosen one, he's the Neo, right? And then somehow he goes to stay with him and basically learn under him, and then he sends him to Mexico and provides him contacts. So how does this random priest in Miami of this backwoods type religion have all these contacts to all these people in Mexico?
The aliens gave it to him.
Oh, and that was
like literally, Lisa, it's just ridiculous
that he was able to astral project. That's where that comes in. He was able to astral project and be able to tell you things that no one else could tell you. But they were saying that potentially he had intel on the people that he was catering to, whether it was drug cartels, whether it was, the equivalent of their FBI or whatever, and therefore was providing them stuff in order to convince them of stuff in order to get in with them. That's
that makes more sense to me than him actually even having supernatural powers is
Yes.
like he's got all these politicians and cartel people and celebrities, and he's all friends with them, and somehow he's able to predict their future and shit like that and know things that he shouldn't know. Well,
Right.
yeah, you could look at it and say there's an aspect that could be supernatural because he is practicing like dark sorcery and shit like that. Or he has all these like high up connections and they're feeding him information the same way that they were feeding Henry Lee Lucas information, because they would say like there's no way he could have killed these two people because he would have had to been in two places at one time, but somehow he knows intimate details about the crime scene that you would only know if you were there. Well, hello, the only way he could know that shit is if somebody was feeding him information. And I think it could have been the same with Adolfo. Because there's an aspect to this that's like they were almost, it was almost like he wasn't an employee, because I talked about in our first program to kill episode when I was talking about the pedos, you remember I said like there were underground tunnels under the school that would like pop up in like random like warehouses and sheds and shit, and it didn't make sense why they were connected to the school. And then Michael Aquino at the Presidio military base, his house was really close to like their daycare center, and these kids could describe his house like in perfect detail. Well, Adolfo had a huge mansion in the middle of Mexico City that was located directly across from an elementary school. And so it very much reminded me of Michael Aquino and all the pedos, like with the McMartin school shit. Because why is this guy who's murdering all these people in this super ritualistic way have a house right next to an elementary school? And as we go in, I might even save this for the second part of the episode, but kids were involved with a lot of this shit. And
Yes.
the further you dig into this stuff, the more you find that it fits the mold of all the other serial killers and pedos, that, you know, they do use kids in these rituals, and it's important that they have easy access to something like that. And so the way that the bodies were mutilated, it also reminded me kind of like Marilyn Monroe-esque, because all of their internal organs were missing. And I do think that there's a lot to be said about A, ritualism, and two, black market organ harvesting, because this guy was involved in all of that shit. He was involved in the drug trade. He was involved in he was somehow was linked to like Chicago mob bosses like Marilyn was. Super random. And then all of the victims, all of their internal organs are missing. I'm talking brains, heart, lungs, all that shit was gone. So I just, yeah, you could say he was using them for rituals and shit because he was a sorcerer or whatever, but it makes more sense to me with the amount of money that he had and the type of lifestyle that he had, that he might have been involved in like some type of black market organ trade as well. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I'm going to interject really quickly.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit about some of the practices of the Caribbean. From what I remember being told was that when they brought the African slaves into the Caribbean, most of them were allowed to maintain a lot of their cultural, religious practices, belief systems, and what have you. And then being here, it kind of started to morph because you started to have, I think initially you started to get the separation. They didn't want the different nationalities to mix because then they would overthrow, the slave owners and stuff like that. But I think what ended up happening is that you start to get some mixing of like Santeria, voodoo, hoodoo, Palo Mayombe, and all that stuff. But when you really start to see it take off is when you start to see the influx of the refugees coming into the US, particularly in Florida, right? And that's when you start to see a huge upcropping or upgrowing of Palo Mayombe, Santeria, hoodoo, and all that stuff in Miami specifically, right? So it's melting pot of Afro Caribbean belief systems. and it's almost like they're mixing it in with Christianity, like how the ritual is, how so like with Palo Mayombe, kind of like back in the day with Christian and Catholic faith, they built churches around relics, right? A saint died, they built the church up or whatever. They kind of had a similar belief in that they believed that you would have to create a cauldron and put a dead body parts in it, and then I think you would add like 20 some sticks coming out of it and basically create this relic and then build your housing or whatever and then you would basically, it would not come to life, but this is how you would communicate with deities, and you would ask and petition and pray and what have you, right? Everything from you name it, like is my husband cheating on me, or I want to become rich, or what have you. But one of the main things I think that stuck out to me with Palo is that they required a skull inside of it, and that because they wanted it to talk to you, right? Which is kind of reminiscent to me of what the Templars had been accused of
The original
talking to
alphabet,
a
right?
head. And I was like, I wonder how much of that is correlated, because we do know you have a lot of Masonic Templar type influences into the US culture, into intelligentsia of the US government. And now you have these types of religions all mixing in. How much of them are breeding together? And now you're getting something, whether it is astral projection, whether it is looking into, mind manipulation. I think they're throwing everything out there to see how they can manipulate a situation and gather intel information and manipulate countries and all that other stuff. But with Paulo, that was what I understood it to be. And it was, like an Afro ritual type belief system. And what I had told Nick about, I was like, what's really interesting is that you don't have a whole lot of Cuban presence or influence in Mexico, especially during the 80s. And it was all pretty
Right.
much over in Florida. All you had
Mhm.
was Mexican in Texas, and then you had, well, Mexican in California as well, but a lot of the Caribbean was mainly centralized in Florida. And so, not that there's discrimination, but you didn't hear of it readily for there to be a huge Cuban influence. So it stuck out to me. I was like, not to say that there wasn't, but it just stuck out to me. I was like, wow, that's really interesting that there would be, you know, such a heavy Cuban presence. But then when I read and it was saying that these were students from this side, I was like, oh, they were recruiting people. Oh, well,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
nice. How lovely.
And I think that they wouldn't practice this stuff if it didn't work. I've said that before. If they did it a couple, you know, dozen times and they weren't getting results, I don't think that they would continue
Mhm.
to practice this shit. And
Right.
so I don't find that it's separate from, it's like you were saying. I think that the Templars were definitely up to some shit, and we have so many Masons in the governmental structure. And so I'm not going to say that Adolfo just came up with this on his own. I think maybe he was steered in that direction, obviously. But if they weren't getting results, they wouldn't continue to even fuck with it, really.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys have heard about I just want to mention it, not to tangent too far, but I think the channel is called Old World Florida. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he talks about how if you really read the Bible and you look at the United States, Florida, I'm 100% convinced at this point was the original place of the Garden of Eden. And all of the geological, I mean, it lines up perfectly. And so when you're talking about all this shit, hoodoo, voodoo, Haitian, crazy Palo Mayombe coming into Florida, I think that there's been a really decisive effort to fuck Florida up, because it's such a sacred place. And I think that they've done a great job hiding a lot of history from people, and
Mhm.
I do not put it past them to use satanic and or ancient religions to basically pervert a lot of the beautiful things that we have, even in the US. If it was the Garden of Eden in Florida, I think that's pretty crazy that we're looking in like the most barren desert crazy place in the world for it to, look at the Middle East. Why would that be the fucking Garden of Eden? It's like literally responsible for nothing. Like it's a dirty dust bowl in the middle of Foxville. Why would that be the Garden of Eden? I mean, look at Florida.
I have my own theories that go along with that, but we won't get into that on this episode because it has to do with other lands outside of Antarctica and how we're separated from those. But I will say that to go into that theory that you're talking about, there's a lot of people that believe that when they say that the Titans are going to rise up out of the rivers, that it's actually talking about the Mississippi River. And it just so happens that Tennessee named their football team the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of stuff that they cover up and hide and shit like that. When you mentioned how Miami in particular is like this melting pot of all these like weird religions coming together, I mean, that makes sense to me. And what is this?
He says he's been to the Middle East twice, and it's nothing like your bullshit Zionist media portrays it.
What is it like? I don't know. I've never
Oh, I don't
been.
know.
I don't actually. I don't want to go. It just doesn't look like a good time to me. But Florida does. Shit. I actually have been to oh God, where did I went somewhere on spring break, had a hell of a time. Way better than the Middle East, but getting back to Adolfo, yeah, I do think he could have been practicing like dark sorcery stuff. And his mom, I think that they were from Puerto Rico, maybe.
She was originally from Cuba, and then
Cuba,
I
okay.
think she had him when she had him when she was 15, and I was like, that's considering. And again, I don't know what was going on at the time, but that's from what I remember. Most Hispanics are very conservative, and to have gotten pregnant at 15, I think, is a really big deal. I would think, right? In my opinion. And it just seems a little bit not questionable, but I think there's more there. I don't know why. I just feel like there's more.
Let me ask you this. Is the name Adolfo popular? Because I feel like that in itself is like pretty specific.
It is.
Like,
it
like
is very
the
specific.
Hispanic Adolf. And
so
I mean,
one of the things you'll notice is that because Cuba was closed off for so long, you'll hear or you'll find that most of the names in Cuba are very old Spanish names. You don't hear now like an Americanized or watered down type Hispanic type names. You hear these really old Latin Spanish names and you're like, oh, I bet you he's from Cuba. And only because you're like, I've never heard that name before. That's like really not regal, but it's so Spanish. It's or so Latin. It hasn't been watered down. So Adolfo, I would think that is somewhat akin to some sort of European.
Literally, dude.
Yeah, European influence for sure.
It stuck out to me the first time I heard it.
Has anybody delved into his bloodlines?
I have not. All I know is about his mom. Information on this guy is kind of hard to find because, I mean, there's a reason they want you to be able to access specific things about him and not everything. Like, I don't know who the baby daddy is. I mean, he could have been like a fucking high up in the government or some shit. And that's why they buried who Adolfo's real father is. But why I say that is because, like, here is an example of some of the victims, right, that they found at the ranch that had been skinned alive, buried alive, beheaded, all the things. So one of them was the owner and secretary of a company that served as a front for a cocaine processing lab, an informant for the federales, a mistress of an informant for the federales, 2 federal narcotics officers, 3 former police officers, and the nephew of a U.S. customs agent. So again, they try to make it look like this guy was just out randomly picking off fucking people on spring break, and he wasn't. The victims, I think, were chosen specifically, but they mix in some random people like Mark from the news, like, oh, it's a missing college student, and then, oh, by the way, we found all these other bodies, and they make it all like it was just super random. But I think they throw people like Mark in there to confuse you that this isn't specific, like they do with a lot of other, like David Berkowitz and Henry Lee Lucas, even some of Ted Bundy's victims were kind of questionable. Like they had, like one of them's dad was a police officer. Like it's interesting how they throw random people into the mix to confuse you that these are organized hits, kind of like even with Manson, because it was like I said before, they never talk about how the first Manson victim, Lino LaBianca, he was involved with gangsters. He owed like $250,000 in gambling debts. He was, part of a real nefarious crowd and owed a bunch of people. And then he turns up a Manson victim. And then like they throw Sharon Tate in there. Her fucking husband's part of the Process Church and a Satanist. And it's like, oh, we're super random. Yeah, fucking right. You know what I mean? Like it just, they do that stuff to confuse you.
Yeah, they muddy the waters with it to throw you off of the scent.
Right. And pretty much that's what they do. And I don't know how much time you guys have left, but I was going to kind of talk about after they arrested some of these guys, like the weirdness that happened around that too. Because like a lot of the serial killers like Ted Bundy escaping jail twice, and the cops rolled up on Jeffrey Dahmer countless times and never took him in either. And by the way, some of the stuff that Jeffrey was doing is very reminiscent of like what Lisa was talking about, eating the organs, keeping the skulls, very ritualistic stuff. And who they're learning this from, they were both in the military. I mean, you could start drawing some connections just based on that. But so they start trying to bust these assholes from the ranch, the compound, whatever, and take them into custody. But for reasons unfucking known, a large contingent of heavily armed Mexican federales burned down the death shed at Rancho Santa Elena, and they destroyed all of the evidence before it could be processed properly. So again, it's like if it was how they're making it out to be in the news, why would they send a big team of Mexican SWAT team members essentially to go burn this place to the ground with a bunch of valuable evidence still inside, and
Julia, I'm curious, and I don't know what everybody's thoughts are about Tripoli in this room, but he always makes a really good point, and it's, would there really be any organic serial killers and terrorism if it wasn't curated from three-letter agencies to begin with?
I think that there is a mix when it comes to serial killers. I think that there is a mix of genuine, authentic serial killering and the CIA programmed serial killers. I've watched enough like forensic files and like detective shows to know like some people are born with a level of psychopathy that they just absolutely do not feel human emotion whatsoever, and the only way that they can get some type of excitement out of life is like literally murdering other human beings. I do think there are genuine psychopaths. I think you can create a psychopath easily and then just send them out in the world and then let them do as they will. But the more famous they become, the more you should start looking at their background as to, are they CIA programmed killers? Because it's like I said, there are so many actual serial killers out there that might have 5 minutes in like a psychopath documentary. And then there are the superstars, Ted, Jeff, John Wayne Gacy, Berkowitz, Zodiac. The more famous they become, the more immortalized they become. That's when you need to start looking at their background and say, who the fuck really is this guy? Because the boring run-of-the-mill psychopaths that murder their pregnant wife and kids, they don't get the spotlight that some of these other guys do. So
Right, and I
to
find
me,
it
I think it's
curious
like a
that if you look
50-50 split.
if you look into a lot of things or a lot of these people and you start to see, well, they don't even have half of the body count that like this person that I've never even heard of does. So it's like, why is this person given the center stage and this person isn't? And there's got to be a narrative behind it that they're trying to push.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that's 100% part of it. I actually think so. Adolfo is in the news, right? And he's kind of like one of the better known ones, but his ranch was like one out of like 20 ranches where they busted fucking cults with bodies all over the place. But Adolfo gets the spotlight. Why? Then you find out he's in the military. Then you find out his mom gets off the hook 30 times being arrested. Then you find out he's working with some like a Marina Abramovich type celebrities and doing spirit cooking parties and shit. And it's like, why does this guy get the spotlight? You know? Oh yeah, he's CIA. You know what I mean? So it's like you got to start kind of trying to tie stuff together. And it's like I said before, I think a lot of the ways his victims were found aren't very far off from like Jeffrey Dahmer victims.
No, they're
So
not.
it's
If
like
anything, they were more
literally,
gruesome.
yeah. And so I think that there is an aspect of actual real serial killers out there. I think that I saw something on TikTok, or maybe Colby told me about it. There's like 100 active serial killers in the US at any given time. You know, I'm sure that's true. But the ones that get the HBO special, those are the ones you need to start looking at with a little bit more of a magnifying glass. But so when they start arresting these people at the compound, Adolfo and a couple of his closest homies take off. They go into hiding and they become the subjects of a massive manhunt. And this is where it starts to get fucky, because this is the story. They say on May 6th, random police officers are searching for a missing child, and they inadvertently stumble upon Constanzo and his followers' hideaway in Mexico City. They're looking for a missing child that's completely separate from the manhunt for Adolfo, but somehow inadvertently stumble upon his hideout. And they go to approach him, and shots are fired from the apartment. And within 5 minutes of this exchange, 200 police officers surround the apartment complex. And it's interesting to me how they were able to get there so fast when it was just a random police officer looking for a missing child. And within 5 minutes, there are 200 police officers surrounding the apartment complex. So how they got there so fast has yet to be explained. They really can't give a reason why. And so a 45-minute gun battle ensued between Adolfo and the cult members and the police. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Waco at all, when they sieged the compound, right? That was the first time they sieged on Waco. I think it was like a 20 to 30 minute standoff between the ATF and the Branch Davidians or whatever. And there was multiple dead bodies, ATF dead bodies, Branch Davidian dead bodies everywhere. This was a 45-minute gun battle between Adolfo and like 5 cult members and 200 police officers. No one gets shot. One police officer gets a little nick in his arm. One police officer. Nobody dies, right?
Are you saying they were actually just playing poker and then they were deciding who loses and they got to take the gunshot wound?
Dude, I don't think this even happened, is what I'm saying. I think that they totally fabricated this story of a ferocious 45-minute gun battle between the cult members and the police. I don't think this even happened, because you're telling me 45 minutes of non-stop shooting at each other, not one person died as a result. Not one person. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I think Waco actually happened. There's fucking dead bodies everywhere, right? this shit sounds like theater to me. And
Absolutely,
so
because when you're planning anything and somebody has to take a bullet wound, you're going to shoot them in the shoulder.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would wonder what
Yeah.
would be the reason that they stopped, since nobody had even died yet. Were they
Well,
like
they
running out of bullets,
claim
or were they tired, or
apparently they just needed a smoke break, because after the 45-minute gun battle, they somehow are able to get into this hiding place, right? And they find that Adolfo and his gay lover are in a closet, and that Adolfo had ordered the other cult members to execute him point blank in the face, and his lover. So this is what they say is like, Adolfo said, "I'd rather you kill me than the police get me. So just shoot me in the face and shoot my fucking gay lover in the face, and let's just get this over with." But here's the thing.
And metaphorically, they were in the closet, but physically, they were really in the closet.
Literally talk about, that's a way to come out of it if you're going to come out. But
And not only that, but Adolfo was very vain. That was another thing.
very,
Super
very
vain.
much so.
So the
And
whole shoot in
so-
the face.
That part didn't make sense to me either, because they took the other cult members into custody, and then they said, "Oh, we have Adolfo here and his gay lover, and they've been shot in the face and repeatedly." So actually, the bodies were riddled with automatic gunfire and in the face specifically, and identification was impossible. So what they did was they took Constanzo's body, and it was actually a U.S. consular official acting on behalf of Constanzo's mother, who lived in the piss and shit house because she's so fucking reliable. They let her decide that it's him, and they flew his body to Miami, and they immediately cremated it. And this is another reason why I think that she's the power structure, because there was this U.S. consular official acting on her behalf to identify the body, and then they flew it back to Miami and immediately cremated it upon its arrival. And the weird thing is, they spotted in the Mexico City newspapers carried reports of witnesses claiming that two men were seen fleeing the scene of the gun battle. But that never gets mentioned, and he was spotted several times after that with his gay lover. So the two bodies they found in the closet most likely were not even him and his gay lover, you know? So they had to cremate the motherfuckers upon, like, why even go to the point of shooting your face off if you're just going to end up getting cremated anyways? Like, I don't get, they just do retarded shit all the time.
Yeah.
So,
they found their passports, though, right? That's how they were able to identify
right? Yeah,
among the rubble, among the 900 million shell casings. Yes,
it would be easy to do, right? They find two bodies in the closet with their faces shot off, but yet there was a wallet, and in the wallet was the ID of Adolfo Constanzo and his gay lover, right? It would just be so easy to do that. And it's like Lisa said, he's a gay cult leader that's friends with all the celebs, and he's very vain, and he's like, "Kill me, shoot my face off."
I believe he modeled for a while too.
Yeah, like, I mean, it doesn't make sense. Shoot my face off. Like, if I was gonna have, like, if I was literally, it was between my cult members killing me or getting taken into custody, and I was like, no, I'm gonna go out in a blaze of glory. Don't shoot my face off.
Yeah.
Like, do anything but shoot my face off. Like,
you know,
do
Julia,
a little dome piece.
That reminds me of the first Jackass movie when they were shooting paintballs at Johnny Knoxville. And at the very end of the scene, they were like, "Are you all right?" And he was like, "Is this good? Then we're okay."
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to get their fucking face shot off. That's like the last way you want to go.
Especially a vain person, right? Who thinks very highly of themselves. And the last thing that people are going to think of is their face just hamburger meat.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No. So it didn't make sense. And of course, the newspapers that they buried said that they saw two guys that matched the description of Adolfo and his lover running from the scene. Which, by the way, I do not think that there was an actual 45-minute gun battle. I think that that was some bullshit fucking spices they added in later to make it sound like they were doing everything they could to arrest these cult members.
Where they
But
where they last seen in Argentina.
right, yeah, no shit.
Nazis.
He's definitely probably out there. Actually, I think that he became someone who trained future generations of these
Oh.
cults. You know, I think that he was a perfect archetypal person to you know, they weren't done with him yet. He served an
No.
amazing purpose. They don't shoot somebody in the face that serves a purpose like that. They probably invested a lot of time and money into making him who he was, and I think he was just repurposed. They probably gave him a new name.
Mhm.
You know, he might have changed something about his physical appearance and became like somewhat of a either
Like,
someone who trains new recruits, or they just like retired him but used him in another unspecified way to serve the program.
he's still in rotation.
Yeah, like he's still in rotation. They still need him. Like there wouldn't have been a reason to get rid of him just because they found out about the compound. They could have just like moved him somewhere else, you know, and he's probably a straight guy now, yeah. Or his lover turned fucking trans and it's fucking Jennifer Aniston. Who knows? Maybe Adolfo is Barack and his lover is Jen Aniston, and this is the I'm serious. I think that they use these guys as characters and they just swap people out and give them new names and identities and shit, and they go on to do
Do
other
you think
stuff.
that do
I
you
think
think
that
they always attacked the homosexual aspect to it on purpose, or do you think that these people really are, and it has to do with occult sex magic?
I think it could be a combo. I know that for some reason they like to hide. Well, they've been a little bit more open about it recently, but they almost like to hide the transgenderism, like when it comes to like fucking Michelle Obama and stuff like that. They're not going to come out and be like, "Yeah, she's got a dick and balls, like first tranny first lady." They're not going to do that, but for some reason they hide it when it comes to that stuff, but they're so proud of it in any other aspect. They want to
Yeah.
ram it down our throats.
that's
And
true.
you know what I mean? It's like such a double-edged sword. Like you're so proud of this shit, but you don't want to admit it. Like why? What was that one lady that they killed because she was like, everybody knows Michelle is a fucking dude and
Right.
Oh, the
Obama's a
you're talking about the comedian,
Joan Rivers.
Joan
Rivers.
Joan
Rivers, yes.
Rivers. Yeah.
So
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 you
here's what I find interesting too is the last 4 years that we all had to live through of this clown circus show that we had to go through. Like, wouldn't it have been the perfect time right then though to be like, oh, and guess what? Like Michelle actually used to be Michael and transitioned. And everybody on that side would have been like, you're one of us, right? That would have been the perfect time to come
Well,
out.
then
Why
they would
didn't
have
they?
had to explain how the kids don't fucking look like, or the kids are
You
how fucking
so
test
just
tube babies and shit.
I can see that. So instead of saying we've been lying to you, which everybody knows they have been, they're just going to keep going
Mhm.
along with the lie. Double down, wear your mask.
Yeah, because I mean, they don't want to have to. They don't want to have to explain where they got the kids from and shit like that. But you know, we were talking about Lady Gaga before this even got started. I think she's trans. I think she's almost admitted it a few times, and she's been like, "So what if I am?" So I mean, there's an aspect where they really get off on like transhumanism as part of like this occultist thing where people should almost be genderless and like be a exact 50-50 split of both energies like within the human body. I think that I think part of occultism, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, because I could be wrong, but it's like your gender traps you into the physical form. I think when you identify as anything, if you identify with your zodiac sign, your gender, anything like that, it traps you into your physical body. And the whole point is to like transcend out of that and be a genderless spirit that floats into a anomalous, ambiguous form. Like that's what they want, is like no one's masculine or feminine. We're all just globs that float around in like Baphomet style tits and dicks and fucking, like, you know what I'm saying? That's what they want. They literally are trying to destroy masculinity and femininity, because it's like there's an attack on both right now.
They take occult ideas of the spirit and they put it into the flesh, and it just doesn't work.
Right. You know
use
what I'm
that,
saying?
yes, and they project it onto physical, like humans.
Because it's almost like popular right now for women, maybe in my generation. I don't know. I was born in 94 and I see a lot of my friends drawn to this, but it's like find like almost a effeminate man that's not very like all the things that make men, and you know, their masculinity is not toxic. That's pushed a lot, toxic masculinity. But it's
What the
almost
fuck
like
does that
find
mean?
someone that you can put their balls in your purse. And I've never been attracted to that, but it's like really seriously like pushed now, is men who are almost effeminate in a way and women who are almost masculine in a way. And I'm not attracted to that. I don't know why that's the thing right now. But I do see that. I think they love to use sexuality as a weapon against us, really. um
Sexuality
so
is the easiest thing to pervert, and especially with the internet being accessible as it is right now, we can't monitor the things that we want to be able to monitor that our kids are seeing, and to be able to pervert them. And like, because we grew up watching movies that our parents were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're showing that kind of thing, and now our kids are seeing like the most ridiculous things on the internet that they shouldn't be seeing. So it's there's a term for it and it's escaping me right now, but it's desensitizing them to these things.
mhm,
and
mhm.
and and that way that it has to be something crazy in order for them to excite themselves. And that is, look, I'm a Christian, and that is just an easy way to push sin into the youth and start them very young.
Well, you know, it's like they say sin feels good, or else it wouldn't be sin, you know. But I think, could they have put that he was a gay guy in, like, in his gay lover, just to kind of like, oh, he murdered all these people and he skinned them alive and buried them alive and ripped their spines out and made fucking dildos out of them. But the worst part of all is that he was gay. Like, that's the bad part. Like, that's the bad part. He was gay. Like, so to me, it just seems like a weird aspect of like the story for me. Maybe he was gay. I don't really give a shit either way, because he had fucking bodies buried all over his fucking ranch. You know what I mean? It's like they choose weird things to kind of like make the make be the important part of it. Not that he had bodies buried all over his property. It's that he was gay and he was found in a fucking closet with his gay lover. That's the part. You know, it's weird to me, but I know we're kind of coming to like the cutoff point, because you guys have better places to be.
No, we
But
don't.
I wish I could
um
go longer on this. Believe me, I do. Sorry.
I do
No,
think
but we're
that
gonna
this
do a
is
part two.
is a
We're gonna
good,
do a part
yeah,
two.
it's a good stopping point, because I think in the next part I want to talk about some of the other stuff that they found after they launched like a big investigation after they busted Adolfo, because it spider webs off into like a bunch of different shit. But I guess the main takeaway is you can look at it from a spirituality aspect of it. You can look at it from a governmental aspect of it. You can watch the Ancient Aliens episode tonight for homework. I don't really give a shit which way you go with it, but this guy's super interesting, and there is even more crazy stuff to learn about him probably in part 2. So
Some of the interesting things that definitely that I would love to dive into with you, Julia, is like some of the how they were getting the cult indoctrinated, some of the practices and some of the things that they were forcing them to do. And one of them I think is really possibly a tie in to some of the other cults and the other things that were happening currently in that era in during that time period. That is
100.
definitely like a nod that you're like, wait, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
No,
ti
I'm
I think it
excited.
ties
I
it in
think
nicely.
it'll be good too because I have some other stuff um that I got from Program to Kill that I think is really important to this too. So we'll do that in the part 2.
Sounds good to me. All right, awesome. All right. I'll let all of you just plug your stuff again real quick. Julia, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was great. That was awesome.
Sorry for being late, guys.
No, oh no, you're fine.
No.
It happens to the best of us. Real quick, Catalyst, let everybody know where they can find your amazing work, please, sir.
Hey, thank you guys. I run the White Rabbit podcast, and you can find me at all the usual suspects except for YouTube because they kicked me off 4 years ago when I questioned the vaccine. And you can start finding me on the Cult of Conspiracy every Friday. I will be doing a breakdown of some stuff that I'll announce later. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be on here because this type of stuff doesn't hit my radar and I'm a newbie when it comes to this topic. So I apologize if I had dumb questions, but this is very interesting to me and thank you.
No, thank you for joining us, man. This stuff was new to me too, so it's the same thing. And Julia, please let everybody know where they can find your amazing podcast as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wherever you listen to podcasts, Patreon for extra stuff, not YouTube, like Catalyst was saying. Fuck them. Oh, somebody said Julia is growing on me. Oh, appreciated.
You have to
But
check her
yeah,
out. Her
I'm
shows
also
are pretty
on.
great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm either you love or hate me. And I'm okay with either one because I just want people to learn shit. It's not really so much about me as it's about the information, So, and if you like the stuff that I cover, I am also on Cult of Conspiracy every Saturday. So, lots of different ways you can get the information. But thanks so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to part 2. Think it'll be great.
Yes. Thank you very much again. And Lisa, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. I love when you bring stuff to the show. It's always interesting. Is there anything that you wanted to plug or anything you want to say?
No, just thank you, Brad, for being here. I really like meeting you. Julia, as always, I'm very, very itching to get to part 2. As usual, this was a topic that I told Nick. I was like, hey, I want to cover this, but I don't know that we could do it all together, like in terms of the time frame or whatever. And then when I heard you cover Julia, I was like, okay, we're just gonna have Julia on.
Yeah.
We're gonna have Julia on
Thank
because I
you.
want to share notes and stuff like that. And she's done extensive work on it. I'm just very tickled that you even covered it. So that's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody in the live on both channels. And that, I guess, concludes another Fridays. Sorry again that JJ was not here. I do think he will be here next week, and he has a special guest, too. So definitely check that out. And yeah, until the next one, everybody be well. Later.